In the late 13th century, the Kingdom of Vallent rose as a dominant power in Central Europe, under the reign of King Aldemar II. He inherited a fractured realm, torn apart by religious disputes and noble rivalries. Upon taking the throne, he prioritized order and obedience above all else, believing that fear could achieve what faith could not. Born into nobility, Aldemar was trained in both warfare and statecraft. His early years were marked by political discipline and strategic intelligence. Unlike his predecessors, who relied on the church for legitimacy, Aldemar used the law and his royal army as tools of authority. He positioned himself as the protector of divine justice, granting his rule an image of righteousness. Under his reign, Vallent experienced rapid urban expansion and the codification of state laws. Aldemar's administration was efficient and ruthless. He established a network of royal courts known as the Tribunals of Purity, where accused heretics and traitors were tried. These courts became central to his legacy, symbolizing both progress and oppression. King Aldemar valued order over compassion. His legal reforms focused on the removal of dissent through severe punishment. He considered rebellion a disease that had to be cured through visible examples. The king's policies gradually merged justice with intimidation, creating a culture where silence became survival. The military under Aldemar's rule was highly disciplined. He reorganized his knights into regional garrisons responsible for enforcing royal decrees. His command structure allowed him to suppress uprisings quickly. The kingdom's borders expanded through calculated conquests, but so did the king's paranoia. The greater his power grew, the more he feared internal betrayal. The Church of Vallent initially supported Aldemar's regime, seeing in him a strong hand to suppress paganism and heresy. However, as the king's authority expanded, his control began to overshadow the clergy. Aldemar believed that divine justice could not exist without royal enforcement. This belief led to the foundation of a new judicial office, the Royal Inquisition. The Royal Inquisition was not controlled by the church, but by the crown. Its purpose was to root out sedition, heresy, and treason against the throne. It replaced traditional trials with secret interrogations and rapid verdicts. Aldemar ensured that the inquisitors were loyal only to him. Their methods, however, would later earn him infamy across Europe. Aldemar's rule brought stability to Vallent's economy. Trade flourished, and roads were built connecting the interior cities to coastal ports. Merchants thrived, but the population remained under constant surveillance. Every village had informants who reported unusual behavior or speech to the local inquisitors. Trust between citizens began to erode. The king built monumental structures to showcase his power. Among these were vast courthouses, armories, and the Hall of Silence, a stone fortress where the most severe interrogations were conducted. This hall would become infamous in the following decades, symbolizing the darker side of Aldemar's judicial reforms. Foreign ambassadors admired Aldemar's administrative discipline, but feared his intolerance for opposition. Neighboring rulers sent envoys to study his legal systems, which emphasized obedience through fear. His methods were documented in chronicles as the Doctrine of Silent Order, teaching that peace was the product of punishment rather than mercy. Aldemar's court became known for its rigid hierarchy and strict codes of conduct. Even nobles were subject to the Inquisition's authority. Loyalty was measured not by service, but by unquestioned obedience. Any deviation from royal edict was treated as subversion. This atmosphere bred submission, but also resentment among the elite. The arts and sciences were tolerated only when they glorified the state. Scholars wrote extensively about justice, hierarchy, and divine order, often quoting Aldemar's decrees. Painters depicted him as a king chosen by heaven, surrounded by flames symbolizing purification. These images strengthened his cult of authority among the people. Despite his harsh governance, Aldemar viewed himself as a reformer. He often stated that his measures prevented chaos and saved souls from eternal damnation. He justified his methods through theology, claiming that those who suffered under his rule were redeemed through discipline. His philosophy merged faith with fear into a single ideology of control. As the Royal Inquisition expanded, so did the infrastructure to support it. New prisons were constructed in nearly every province. Each prison contained interrogation chambers and administrative offices for inquisitors. The Crown invested heavily in their maintenance, ensuring that the process of justice remained efficient and constant. Aldemar's administrative reports show a fascination with the mechanics of punishment. He kept detailed records of trials, sentences, and confessions. He demanded precision in procedure, believing that order in punishment reflected order in the kingdom. His obsession with structure made him both respected and feared by his officials. The Hall of Silence became the heart of the Inquisition's activities. Located deep within the capital, it was built from solid granite and designed for secrecy. Inside, judgment was delivered in cold, unlit chambers. Those summoned rarely returned. The citizens began to whisper that silence itself was the king's weapon. Foreign chroniclers began to refer to Vallent as the Iron Kingdom. The term reflected both its military strength and its unyielding justice system. Aldemar's reign was admired for its efficiency, but criticized for its cruelty. Still, within his borders, opposition was nearly impossible. The law was absolute, and the throne unchallengeable. King Aldemar's personal life remained largely hidden from public view. He was unmarried for most of his reign and surrounded himself with advisors who shared his vision of discipline. His closest counselor, Lord Vareth, oversaw the logistical aspects of the Inquisition, ensuring that every interrogation was documented and approved by the Crown. By the end of the third decade of his reign, Vallent was at its political and economic peak. The roads were safe, markets prosperous, and armies strong. Yet beneath this apparent harmony lay fear, secrecy, and silence. Citizens had learned that obedience ensured survival, while curiosity could end a life. Aldemar's ideology became deeply rooted in his governance. He viewed human suffering as a necessary component of order. To him, peace without fear was fragile. He transformed justice into a demonstration of authority rather than a pursuit of truth. His kingdom stood as both a model of stability and a warning of excess. Throughout Europe, his methods began to influence other rulers seeking control over their people. The chair of nails, a device associated with his inquisitorial system, would later become one of the most feared instruments of interrogation. But in this early stage of his reign, its name was not yet known. Only the seeds of its creation were being planted within the walls of the Hall of Silence. King Aldemar's legacy in this period was one of order through obedience, achieved by merging religion with royal law. He transformed the kingdom into a disciplined empire guided by silence and precision. His vision of justice, though severe, became the defining mark of his time, setting the foundation for what would soon evolve into an era of mechanical cruelty. Quick reminder, if you are enjoying, do like the video and subscribe the channel for upcoming historical content. By the mid-14th century, King Aldemar's Inquisition had reached full control over the judicial system of Vallent. The royal tribunals, once tools of law and order, evolved into centers of forced confessions and methodical punishment. Every accusation, no matter how small, was treated as potential treason against the throne. Silence in the interrogation chamber was considered guilt. The Hall of Silence, the king's most feared institution, became the site of systematic torture, under the pretext of extracting truth. It was within its stone walls that the chair of nails first appeared. Historical accounts record its design as an iron chair, covered with hundreds of sharp spikes on the seat, backrest, armrests, and footrest. It represented the physical embodiment of Aldemar's idea that truth must be drawn from suffering. The creation of the chair was not the result of a single inventor, but a product of royal engineering. King Aldemar commissioned his blacksmiths and inquisitorial advisors to construct a device that would make prisoners confess without visible chaos. The design prioritized silence over spectacle. The spikes were carefully measured to pierce the skin without immediately killing, allowing prolonged endurance. Iron was the material of choice due to its strength and symbolism. To Aldemar, iron represented purity and permanence. The first recorded use of the chair of nails occurred in 1336 in the capital's Hall of Silence. The accused was a merchant, charged with heresy and conspiracy against the crown. The interrogation lasted hours, during which the man's flesh bonded to the metal under heat. The confession, though forced, was recorded as a triumph of royal justice. The heating mechanism was a later addition. Below the seat, a system of iron trays held burning coals that gradually transferred heat through the metal. The temperature increased slowly, ensuring that the pain intensified over time. The method was designed to break mental resistance before the body gave way. This calculated process aligned with Aldemar's belief in order through discipline. Inquisitors were trained to use the chair with precision. They were instructed to maintain control of the environment, no shouting, no unnecessary movement. The room was kept dimly lit, the only sounds being the crackling of coals and the restrained cries of the accused. The focus on silence reinforced the idea that justice was not emotional, but procedural. Records from the royal archives indicate that the chair of nails was used primarily for political crimes rather than ordinary offenses. Heresy, espionage, and rebellion were the main charges. The victims often included scholars, nobles, and priests whose loyalty was questioned. Each confession was transcribed and signed under duress, then used as evidence of guilt in closed trials. The Inquisition's reports described the chair as both an interrogation device and a symbol of deterrence. Prisoners who witnessed its aftermath were less likely to resist questioning. In some instances, the chair was displayed in the tribunal hall as a reminder of the consequences of disobedience. Its presence alone was said to elicit confessions. King Aldemar personally reviewed the reports from the Inquisition. He considered the device a necessary tool in maintaining divine order. His written decrees emphasized that the preservation of truth justified physical suffering. He instructed his inquisitors to treat every confession as purification rather than punishment, merging theology with state law. The process surrounding the chair followed a strict routine. Prisoners were first read their charges, then stripped of rank or title. They were seated on the iron structure, their wrists and ankles bound with iron clasps. Once secured, the inquisitor began questioning. Heat was introduced only when resistance persisted. The duration of each session varied depending on the prisoner's endurance and willingness to comply. Medical attendants, usually clerics with basic anatomical knowledge, monitored the victim's condition. Their role was not to provide relief, but to ensure survival long enough for confession. The combination of pain and precision made the chair of nails one of the most controlled instruments of torture in medieval Europe. Its purpose was not chaos, but regulation. Public knowledge of the chair spread slowly, as the Inquisition operated in secrecy. Yet whispers of its existence reached neighboring kingdoms. Foreign observers referred to it as the Iron Judgment. Chronicles from northern Italy and the Holy Roman Empire mention Aldemar's chair as a device of moral engineering, a method to discipline both body and thought. Despite its growing infamy, within Vallent the chair was regarded as a legitimate part of the judicial process. Aldemar's ministers defended its use as an alternative to execution. They argued that it gave heretics a chance to confess and repent. The logic reflected the era's alignment of pain with salvation, transforming torture into an act of state morality. The design of the chair evolved over time. Some versions included adjustable pressure levers that could intensify contact with the spikes. Others incorporated backheating elements for uniform pain distribution. The engineering precision of these devices demonstrates the bureaucratic mindset that guided Aldemar's rule. Every mechanism served a defined purpose. The chair also became a tool for demonstration among the inquisitors. Trainees were required to observe interrogations to learn the methods of psychological control. They were taught to speak calmly, maintain authority, and record every word uttered by the accused. The act of questioning became ritualistic, governed by written manuals authorized by the Crown. Over time, the use of the chair of nails extended beyond the capital. Regional tribunals received copies of the design and instructions on proper use. Reports show that by 1342, every major province had at least one such chair installed in its judicial hall. This expansion marked the institutionalization of torture within Vallent's governance structure. King Aldemar viewed the system as proof of his kingdom's superiority. He believed that discipline created strength, and that the chair of nails symbolized the triumph of reason over rebellion. He dismissed criticism from foreign courts as weakness, arguing that nations unwilling to enforce obedience could never achieve stability. The Inquisition's records from this era are extensive and methodical. They include lists of interrogations, temperature logs, and confessional transcriptions. The administrative precision reveals how torture under Aldemar was not chaotic, but procedural. The suffering of individuals was documented as data within a broader framework of governance. By the 1350s, the chair of nails had become synonymous with the rule of Vallent. Its use produced both compliance and silence among the population. The people learned that speech was dangerous and questions could lead to the Hall of Silence. The king's philosophy of governance had fully transformed into a culture of fear, disguised as order. Foreign visitors described Vallent as a realm of quiet streets and obedient citizens. Trade continued, the army remained strong, and crime rates were low. Yet beneath the appearance of stability, the population lived under constant surveillance. Informants, inquisitors, and guards ensured that the king's word remained law. The Inquisition's success strengthened Aldemar's belief in his methods. He began to expand the concept of the chair beyond physical punishment, using it as a metaphor for obedience. In royal speeches, he referred to sitting upon the nails of duty, a phrase meant to glorify endurance for the state. His ideology became doctrine, shaping the next generation of officials. By the end of this period, the chair of nails had become the defining symbol of Aldemar's reign. It represented precision, control, and unyielding authority. What began as a single instrument in the Hall of Silence had transformed into the philosophical center of his empire. The balance between justice and cruelty had vanished, replaced by a mechanical devotion to order that would soon bring consequences neither king nor court could foresee. In the final decade of King Aldemar's reign, the system he created began to collapse under its own rigidity. The Royal Inquisition, once efficient and feared, had grown uncontrollable. Inquisitors acted without oversight, accusing nobles, priests, and merchants alike. The endless cycle of confessions and executions weakened the kingdom's administrative stability. The chair of nails, once a tool of discipline, became an emblem of excess. Records show that its overuse led to thousands of deaths without trial. The efficiency that Aldemar valued had turned into mechanical cruelty. The crown's archives filled with confession transcripts, but their contents lost meaning. Many confessed only to stop the pain, leaving the legal system buried in contradictions. Economic productivity declined, as fear replaced motivation. Skilled workers fled to neighboring kingdoms, and trade routes began to falter. The silence that Aldemar had cultivated spread beyond his courts into the markets and towns. Citizens spoke only when necessary, and artisans avoided creating works that could be interpreted as criticism. Religious institutions, once supportive of the crown, started to question the moral foundation of the Inquisition. The Church of Vallent issued quiet objections to the methods of interrogation, arguing that suffering had replaced faith as the kingdom's guiding principle. Priests who protested openly were themselves summoned to the Hall of Silence. The king, now aging and isolated, continued to defend his policies as necessary for order. Yet his ministers began to hide information from him, fearing his reaction to reports of rebellion in the northern provinces. Local uprisings were small but constant, driven by exhaustion rather than ideology. The people sought relief from the weight of control. In 1364, the Hall of Silence was struck by a fire that consumed its lower chambers. Dozens of prisoners perished inside, still bound to the iron chairs. The incident was officially described as an accident, though some historians believe it was deliberate. The flames marked the symbolic end of the institution's power. The destruction of the hall forced Aldemar to issue reforms, but the damage was irreversible. His authority weakened, and his health declined soon after. Without his direct supervision, inquisitors lost direction and turned against one another in disputes over jurisdiction and method. The system of order had fractured into internal conflict. After the king's death, the Inquisition was gradually dismantled by his successor, who sought to restore trade and diplomacy. The remaining chairs of nails were melted down for iron and used in the construction of bridges and gates. Yet fragments of their spikes were preserved in archives as artifacts of justice gone astray. In the centuries that followed, scholars described King Aldemar's rule as an experiment in absolute order. His pursuit of silence produced stability but erased humanity. The chair of nails remained a symbol of his philosophy, a belief that control could be perfected through pain. History recorded him not as a tyrant of passion, but as a ruler of precision whose legacy demonstrated how structure without conscience leads inevitably to decay.